Hey, how you doing, everybody? So my name is Adam and I am part of the youth team here at Dawlish Christian Fellowship, and this is our first youth video since coming back off our summer holidays, so start of the term. And I thought that it would be good if we did a kind of short mini series on our relationship with Jesus. So I'm going to call this Jesus and Me, nice and simple. And it's going to be a little kind of four-parter. So we'll have a video each week that I'm on kind of doing the youth talk. And so the first thing though that I would like you to do though, before we kind of crack on with this kind of part one, is I would like you to imagine that you are sat at a table with Jesus, okay? And you get to ask him this question. And this question is, what does it take, Jesus, to follow you? And I want you to kind of then think about, what would Jesus' answer be? Now, perhaps you're thinking to yourself, well, Jesus kind of expects me to be a good person. Jesus expects me to be kind and loving. Jesus expects me to be generous with my time and the stuff that I have. And you know what? You're right. All of those things are correct. You know, we are expected to be kind, generous and loving to those around us, aren't we? But I do think that there's actually a little more to it. That to follow Jesus, there's a more expectation upon us. And so what I wanted to talk about today, and what we will talk about for the following three other sessions as well, is these other roles that Jesus almost expects of us. And the first role that we're going to look at today is the role of a disciple. So what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? So let me give you that question again, sat at the table with Christ. Okay, so you're asking, aren't you? What does it take, Jesus, to follow you? And I think that Jesus would answer by saying, well, to follow me, become a disciple. Okay then, so, right, we're going to crack on with that. First of all though, we are going to have a little mini quiz just to see how much you actually do know about being a disciple and disciples in the New Testament. So here we go. What is a disciple? An apprentice, a follower of Jesus, a student, a follower of a rabbi. How many disciples did Jesus call? 10, 12, 8, or 50? What age were these disciples? 15 to 20, 20 to 30, 30 to 40, or we don't know? Who of the following was not a disciple of Jesus? John, Luke, Bartholomew, or James? Which disciples was Jesus' favourite? John, Peter, Judas, or Matthew? Okay then, so the answers then. So first question then, what is a disciple? Well, actually all four of those options there are kind of correct, so it's a bit mean to me really. So yeah, you could say that a disciple is a student, you know, that their master, the rabbi, of course, is a teacher, so they would have been students. The disciples were students. You could kind of say they were kind of like apprentices as well in a way. It was a very kind of hands-on kind of job that they were kind of a position they were kind of taking on. So they were kind of like apprentices. And yes, yeah, disciples follow Jesus, and yes, disciples traditionally now and throughout history have always been taken on by rabbis. So there you go. So all four of those were technically correct. Okay, so second one then is, how many disciples did Jesus call? And Jesus called 12, which was fairly standard for a rabbi to call back then, 12 disciples. And it's fairly standard for them to actually go out and find their disciples as well. But it was kind of unusual in that normally a rabbi would kind of like test their potential disciples to see whether they could they were going to make the grade, basically. And we don't see that in Jesus. Jesus had a different criteria for why he chose his disciples. Right then, their age. Well, we actually don't know how old Jesus' 12 disciples were. The only one that we get a glimmer of an idea is with Peter, in that we are told that he was married. And normally kind of Jewish kids, Jewish young people wouldn't have kind of got married until they were kind of 18, 20 or thereabouts. So, but everybody else is probably much younger. So they probably were in that 15 to 20 age group, all of them. So all those kind of pictures you kind of see are very elderly men normally kind of as the disciples in paintings and in the films and whatever else. That's probably not true. Jesus probably was very unlikely to have ever chosen disciples who were older than him. That just wouldn't have been what rabbis did or have ever really done. Okay then, so which one of the four there was not a disciple then? So the fourth question, and that is Luke. So it's a bit of a tricky one because of course Luke writes a gospel, doesn't he? And he writes the book of Acts as well. But Luke was actually a companion of Paul, who kind of turns up a little bit later. And who was the favourite disciple? Well, the Gospel of John says John. And but the other Gospels don't say anything about that. So maybe there was a bit of bias there, but maybe he was. Maybe Jesus did have a favourite disciple, and that was John. So there we go. Okay, so let's learn a bit more then about this role of the disciple. Now, in Jesus' time, this was a really, really intense role, very much like between like a child and a parent in some ways. And the disciple would spend literally all of their time with their rabbi, their master. And we see this, don't we, in the Gospels, that when Jesus calls his 12 disciples, they pretty much are with each other constantly. Other than the times when he kind of sends them out on their own to mission, they are with him constantly. And this is very deliberate. You know, the sense that as a disciple, you basically submit to your rabbi. And through that, you are there to mimic everything about them. That's what those disciples were doing. They were mimicking Jesus in the way he led his life and the things that he was saying, the teachings that he was giving them. They were mimicking him as much as they could do. And you know, we see this wonderfully in one of the gospel stories in Matthew with when Peter walks on the water, doesn't he, in the lake. And so the disciples are in a boat and they kind of look up and they see Jesus on the lake walking on the water. And they think it's a ghost. And they kind of start freaking out a bit. And then Jesus is like, no, it's me. And then Peter calls out and says, Lord, call me and I will come to you. And then Jesus says, come. And he kind of jumps out and then he starts walking the water. Now it's a story about faith because he starts sinking, doesn't he? And you know, it's all about how he has his faith is kind of, it's not quite there at the moment. But before he gets out of the water, what does he do? He calls out to the Lord. He asks for the Lord to welcome him because he wants to be with him. He wants to mimic everything that he does. There's a wonderful little story there, you know, about how, you know, the closeness that they had as disciples, that they really did want to be constantly with their rabbi, their Lord. So yeah, now clearly, you know, us today, we're not in this position, are we? You know, we're not in a position where we can, you know, lead this kind of, you know, the lives the disciples had with Jesus now. But Jesus does say very, very clearly that, you know, that we are his disciples if we follow his word, follow his teachings. And I think that not only applies to what kind of came out of his mouth, but I think it also does apply to the life that he was leading there as well. So, you know, of course, we have all this in the Bible, don't we? We have all this, you know, quite explicitly in the Gospels themselves, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And we can kind of see the life that he was leading, the things that he was doing, the things that he expected us to mimic. And of course, we do have his teachings in great detail. We understand, what he was kind of thinking, where he was going with this. And through that, of course, we can then follow him as disciples. We can mimic him. And that's really what it's all about. It's basically following every example of Christ, submitting to him as his disciple in life. So I want you to think just for a moment. I want you to think to yourself, is there, with what you know about Jesus, is there an area in your life that you think you mimic really well? So just have a think for a second about that. Is there one area in your life that you've kind of taken Jesus' word, his message, his teaching, and you've applied it to your life, and you do it really well? And then on the flip side, with what you know about Jesus, is there an area in your life that you could maybe mimic his better, that you could really improve upon? So just pause the video for a second and have a think about that. Okay, so I hope you had some good reflection there. But what I'd like to do now is to challenge you. Whatever you thought maybe you could mimic Jesus better at and kind of improve your life, do something about it. But make sure that whatever it is that you decide, that it becomes daily practice, that it becomes something that is constant, okay? Not something that we apply once a week or once a month, but something that we're doing very much daily to better ourselves. Because this is, yet again, another really important facet of being a disciple, that we are constant and that we are kind of giving ourselves wholly to God in these areas where we're trying to better ourselves. Okay, so I've got one last little question and then we're going to wrap up. And that question is, what kind of person does being a disciple make me? Now, there could be loads and loads and loads of answers to this, but one thing that really kind of stood out for me while I was preparing for this is that being a disciple makes us loyal. And loyalty is really, really important. To show loyalty to Jesus. And, there's kind of two really great ways that we kind of do this. One is by, declaring that he is Lord, usually publicly. Another is with baptism as well, which is something that I know that you guys are going to be thinking about at some point. But yeah, showing loyalty is such an important facet to really kind of have when kind of growing up. You've got to think that, loyalty is so key, isn't it, for people who get married, husbands and wives, that they are able to show loyalty to one another. Loyalty when you're growing up is key, of course, between your friends. And it is absolutely key in the relationship that we have with Jesus. And I think is a really, really important part of being a disciple. Okay then, so just to summarize then, disciples submit to Jesus. Disciples mimic Jesus' teaching and life. Disciples follow his every example. Disciples are constant in their daily practice. And disciples are loyal to their rabbi and Lord. Okay, so that's it then, guys. I hope that's been helpful. I hope something's kind of stuck in there, and hope it inspires you to really kind of take this role of being a disciple of Jesus very seriously, because it is a serious business. So thanks for listening, and bless you all, and we'll catch up again soon. Okay then, bye now.